Hi, I'm Missy with On William Street, and we are here to help you become a more confident quilter, from the piecing to the quilting and everything in between. This week, we are really excited to announce our new quilt along for the year. And for this year, we are going to do a mystery quilt. So this week for our mystery quilt, what we're really going to focus on is fabrics. So we want to make sure that you've got all of your fabrics gathered and pick out the different colors that you want to use in your quilt. So we are going to use an assortment of blues, yellows, with a purple and a green, and then white as our background color. But we have other options on our blog that you can check out, some different color palettes, so just give you some ideas as you put together the fabrics that you need for your mystery quilt. So the fabrics that you're going to need is you're going to need 2/3 of a yard of a green fabric, 1 1/8 of a yard of the purple. And then for our blues, we're going to want to have different values. And we actually have a mix of prints and solids. You're going to need a total of 4 different blues. 3 of them you will need 1/4 of a yard. And then 1 of them you will need 1/2 of a yard. And then the same thing for the yellows. You're going to want to have different values. So we, again, have a mix of prints and solids. We have brighter ones, a little bit that are more subdued, but just a really fun mix. And again, these ones, you will need 5 of them at 1/4 of a yard, and then you will need to have 1 of them at 1/2 a yard. And then for our background fabric, we are going to be using white. So you will need 2 yards for your background. So after you get all of your colors decided on, you've got all of your fabrics gathered, we're going to go ahead and set the blue, the yellow, and the purple aside. For now, we're going to come back to these in a little while, but we are going to get our green and our white cut out this week. So for our green fabric, we do have some templates that we're going to need to cut out later on for the quilt, but we do want to start with our strips that we need to cut. So we are going to need 2 strips that are 3.5 inches wide along the entire width of the fabric. So we're going to go ahead and just make sure that first that our fabric is squared up. We actually need to trim that a little bit. So I'm going to trim it from this side and then I'll scoot it over. It's easier for me to trim from this end. Because we're using the entire width of this strip, we definitely want to make sure that this is squared up so that we don't end up with a funky little curve in the middle of our strip. Okay, now that we've got that squared up, I'm actually going to flip my cutting mat around. And then I'm going to come in here and cut our 3.5 inch wide strips. Okay, and then the next section, we are going to need to have 15 inches of the width, but, 3.5 inches of the width for each of them, but we only want to have 15 inches of the length from the selvage to selvage. So the first thing we're going to want to do is cut off that 15 inches from the selvage. So I'm going to trim this selvage first. And then I'm going to line this up on my mat so that I'm getting 15 inches. And the reason we're doing it this way is because we want to leave this section, the rest of it, open for the templates that are going to come in later in the quilt. So we have it lined up right there on the line. We'll come in, measure our 15. Okay, and then we can set the rest of this green aside. And then we'll take this and we will go ahead and cut our 3.5 inch strips, and we will need to have 3 of those 3.5 inch strips. Whoops. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and set these green pieces aside, and they will come in later when we're putting the quilt together. Okay, so for the white, we are going to come in and we're going to cut 5 strips that are selvage to selvage, and they're going to be 6.5 inches wide. So first I want to just double check to make sure that it is squared up. And it's pretty close. We're just going to trim this little bit. And then I like to flip my cutting mat around when I can so that I'm not completely messing up where the fabric is when it's all laid out flat like this. But this one, we do have to mess it up a little bit because now I need to cut 6.5 inches and my ruler is 6 inches. So we'll need to make sure that it's lined up on the line. And then we're going to add this 1/2 inch down here to what we have here with the width of the ruler. So I'm going to place that ruler right there on the inch mark. And that's going to give me that extra 1/2 inch that I need. Okay, and then that should keep us lined up right there on a line again. So this time we can come in and put our ruler right there on that 1/2 inch mark. And then cut again and get our 6.5 inches. It moved on me. There we go. Okay. I think we've got it right there on the line now. Okay, now that we have our 5 strips, we're going to need 2 of them that are 40 inches long. So because my cutting mat is not 40 inches, I'm actually going to use the 20-inch mark, and I'm going to put the fold on that 20-inch mark to make sure that I get that 40 inches. There's one. Set that one aside. And then with the remaining strips, we're going to need to have 2 pieces that are 21 inches wide. And then the rest of them we're going to cut 6.5-inch squares out of, and we need to have 12 6.5-inch squares. So for these, I'm actually going to unfold it. And I'm going to do 2 at a time. So first we're going to want to make sure that we cut our selvage off. We don't want to use the selvage in our quilting. It will wash and dry a little differently, will shrink differently than the rest of your fabric, so you want to make sure that you cut that off and don't pull that into your quilt. And then we can go ahead and we can move our edge over to that starting line and then cut at our 21 inches. Okay, and then set these 2 pieces aside. And then everything else we're going to cut at 6.5 inches square. So I'm actually going to flip that around, so I'm cutting from this direction. And again, we're going to, just like what we did when we were cutting the widths of the strips themselves, we're going to want to line these up on the line so that we've got that to gather that extra 1/2 inch that we need that is not in our ruler. So I want to try to keep these as lined up and even as I can. Okay, so we've got that extra 1/2 inch there. And then we'll just continue to repeat that until we have 12 squares. Oops, it snagged on me. So there's half of our 6. Cut the selvage off of this one, and then we can get the other 6. Now for this one, I'm going to want to make sure you start from this end so that you've got a slightly bigger piece at the folded end that you can throw in your scrap bin. And then that gives us all the white that we're going to need for our quilt. And now that we've got the green and a good portion of our white cut out, you will have an extra yard of white that we did not cut out in strips. You're going to want to set that aside. We're going to use it for templates later on in the quilt along. So make sure that you get all of your colors gathered, get those first couple of strips cut out, and then meet us back here next month and we'll get started on the sewing. And we're so excited for you guys to join us this year on our quilt along, and we hope you have as much fun as we do. Make sure that you follow us on Facebook or Instagram so you can see everything that we're working on. Subscribe to our newsletter so you don't miss any of the instructions and the links to the templates that you need to complete your mystery quilt for this year. And we'll see you next week.